Because I've been thinking recently,
Listen,
and this is something that for your benefit, for our listeners' benefit, for the benefit of anyone who's listening. This is something that I've actually been kind of racking my brains over the last week or two, which is exactly where I want to, which is thinking about where I want to wind up.
yeah.
Because one thing that's kind of bothered me the last week or two is there's been some talk, mostly on the Discord server. You don't really hear this sort of thing at the office so much, but there's been some talk on the NASA intern Discord server about how one thing we're going to be dealing with probably next year, especially, is budget stuff
Go
because the federal government is probably gearing up for maybe even some shutdowns coming up. If not that, then definitely some um, budget tightness because of fights on Capitol Hill and stuff like that. And as that happens,
on.
it could affect things like, what sort of work there is for contractors and how much pay there is for contractors and civil servants and all these things. So I'm like, do I really want to get myself into this, even as much as I love working there and as much as I want to work there? It's kind of inspired me to keep my options open elsewhere. That's part of why I've kept looking like at places like the American Institute of Physics, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Um, I'm still looking at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, all sorts of places.
It's not a terrible idea. I mean, all of my experience is within the Defense Department. So, I know for DoD employees, they it's it's hard to, especially if you're in uniform, you'd have you can get kicked out of the military, but it's hard. And if you're out of uniform, if you're a civilian, it's real hard to get fired. Like if they have a warm body that can, if the chair is warm, they'll keep you on. But with the NASA stuff, um, do they is
Well, it's not so much about getting let go that I'm worried about that, because I want to stress that it's not so much that I'm worried that jobs are like going to disappear or dry up,
yeah,
although there is some of that going on right now for other reasons because there's like contract, shakeups that are happening.
yeah,
But it's more about like the stability of the enterprise. Because say I've got a project that I'm working on, like
mm,
about some mission. Say that I'm writing about um, the Dragonfly mission, which is something that I have written about, something I want to write further about maybe in the future. That I'm really passionate about. This mission to send a probe to Titan. There's talk that it may get delayed because of budget cuts.
right.
That because where basically Congress tells NASA to draw on its purse strings, because as usual they want to make a scene of being fiscally responsible to the average taxpayer by cutting a couple billion maybe from the budget of an organization that gets less than half a penny on your tax dollar. So
Do you do you know do you know how big the Defense Department is?
yes.
Like, I Nick, the Defense Department doesn't know how big the Defense Department is. It's so wildly massive. Like, like they just did their first agency-wide audit a couple years ago, failed miserably, but celebrated the fact that they completed an audit.
Mm-hmm.
And they found like whole hangars full of like, oh look, it's jet engines. How many? Hundreds, like pieces, parts. Oh, look, it's rockets. Look, tanks. They're just finding things.
I
And
was thinking about this yesterday on my way home. I think it was
yeah,
on my way home. Might have been on my way in, but whatever. On my way to or from work yesterday, I might have mentioned to you at some point that on my usual route to the Goddard offices, I drive by a Maryland National Guard post and armory,
yeah.
and I always look at the Humvees and things lined up in their parking lot, and I'm like, it's kind of funny how it's like that meme that I sent you, where when civilians hear military grade, they think, ooh, good stuff, but when veterans hear military grade, they're like, not good. And
Yeah.
it's so hilarious to me in a way that you know the military gets so much goddamn money, and yet in a
So
lot of ways is still struggling to fucking make do in some of the most key areas. You wonder where the fuck is the money going? And then I remember a conversation I had with my stepfather probably like 10 years ago when all the controversy at the F-35 first started hitting the fan about how, oh, it's going like billions over budget. It's like it's a $1 trillion program, blah blah blah. And he reminded me, Nick, I was in the Air Force. What you don't realize is that a lot of that money is going into projects that we won't hear about for another 20 years.
there is that.
Because again, I could probably rattle off a whole bunch of memes because that's pretty much how I communicate these days. But there's one I saw just the other day, maybe on Tough Sci-Fi or on Twitter, or on like Space Twitter, talking about how people talk about how, oh, well, why are there so many UFO sightings in the United States and they're still going on today and they're still talking about these UAPs or whatever on Capitol Hill, which of course there's a whole nother conversation we could have about that we don't really need to. But
Talk
then
to me.
but the person pointed out, the person making this post pointed out, you do realize that in the 1960s, the United States government was testing planes like the SR-71. So in the 2020s, they're probably testing things that look like these friggin', magic Tic Tacs that those like F-18 pilots saw. So we have no way of knowing what they're testing because they won't tell us for another 30 to 40 years at least. Because right
That
now it's in testing, then it will actually be, in rollout, and it'll probably be classified for another 2 decades.
that makes a lot of sense. That's a pretty plausible argument. I mean, I wish it was aliens, but
Well,
uh,
the thing that I was going to say that I didn't really want to get into, but fuck it,
go
let's
ahead.
get into it, is something that I saw on Instagram this night. It was one of those like compilations of people's like Twitter posts and Tumblr posts and things like that of people all talking about the same thing. And the theme was people talking about how, oh, the government says that aliens are real, and yet the world is going to shit. So it's kind of convenient that the government wants to distract us with this new shiny thing, right? Well, the economy is in shambles and inflation is going through the roof, and the sea is turning into a hot tub, and the forests are all burning. We could just go on, and yet, ooh, look, Mulder and Scully were right all along.
Mulder and Scully didn't have to worry about fucking poison clouds of air that came from like the
Exactly.
other side of the continent. Like,
See, where was that episode of the X Files? The poison cloud that never went away.
oh man. Oh man.
Like, have you seen? I saw a map, like an infographic map, just a couple days ago of all the forest fires in Canada. It's friggin' ridiculous. There's over 1,000 active forest fires in Canada. Like the entire Canadian, like continent or whatever you want to call it, has fires on it. Like everywhere there's forests in Canada has a fire somewhere.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not
that's
like in California. And I'm not trying to like minimize the sorts of wildfires we've had in places like California and other places out west, because those are terrible. They killed people, they ruined homes and businesses and all these things. But Canada, it's not like isolated incidents. It's like the entire friggin' country, and it's
that's
it's
crazy.
insane.
Yeah. It sucks
Well,
that
it's like one of the things that I saw, one of the like I think screenshotted tweets that was in that Instagram post I mentioned. It was talking about how like the ocean's burning, or the ocean's boiling, the forests are burning, inflation is through the roof, and yet everyday people are like, let me circle back to my last email. But that's all you can do. All we can do is keep on keeping on. It basically boils down to keep a stiff upper lip. As much as that may sound cynical, if we do anything less, we'll go insane, and we'll tear our hair out
you
and
know,
die of fright.
I don't think it's cynical. I think it's practical. I mean,
Yeah. The
what to do?
United States Department of Defense.
Yeah.
They're one of the biggest polluters, and they're one of the biggest, and they're one of the organizations that's worrying most about pollution and climate change, because they realize, for instance, their naval bases are going to be flooding in a couple decades, if not within this decade. There's a documentary I watched while I was interning at a film festival in Indianapolis back in the summer of 2017. One of the documentaries that was submitted for possible screening was a documentary about how basically the entire city of Newport News Virginia is like regular floods. Like, the streets have standing water in them, like not even when it rains, it's like just regularly. Like it's coming soon. And this is one of the places where there's naval bases and shipyards and stuff like that. And the Navy, especially, and the Department of Defense in general, are realizing, first of all, this is going to cause problems for our logistics. Second of all, it's going to cause problems for our strategic stuff, because people who are displaced by climate catastrophe and water wars, that old buzz phrase, whatever, that's going to cause problems for us. And they're like, how the hell do we deal with some of this? And then you realize that the people on Capitol Hill don't want them to talk about it. It's like when NASA tries to do, I hate to name names here because this isn't really a political podcast, but when NASA tries to do like climate change research, people like Ted Cruz are saying, well, why is NASA even looking at the Earth? Shouldn't you be looking at space? And it's like, God damn it, dude, get this through your head. We're trying to make sure that the Earth doesn't kill us because we're killing it.
I've always thought the ruling class has a vested interest in their own power.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll probably be to the point where things are nearly catastrophic. And they'll turn the great engine that is the Department of Defense onto it. Because I would say, bar none, the Department of Defense is probably the most powerful single organization on the planet.
Yeah.
And it won't be out of a sense of nobility. It'll be at a sense of class protection.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe
that's probably what's going to take is when the forest fires start burning down gated communities, and when the rising oceans start flooding like gated, oceanfront, like beachfront communities, that's when things are going to start to change, because we know damn well that these, frankly, conservative rich folks don't care until it affects their bottom line and until it affects their like quality of life. Because if it's just affecting poor people who are living in slums or who are living in middle class neighborhoods or whatever the hell you want to call it, any of these social strata that are below them, they don't give a damn, because they can keep going to the bank, and they keep getting chauffeured to the bank, and they can just roll up their windows and lock their doors and ignore all the rest of us who are screaming in the streets or whatever.
It's the Edgar Allan Poe poem, "The Mask of the Red Death." Are you familiar with it?
I've heard. I don't think I've ever read it, but I've heard about it. I know the basic premise. There's like people are going to keep celebrating right until the end.
There's a plague that's killing all the commoners, and so all the royalty close ranks, and they close down the palace, and they just party in the palace as the countryside burns and as the plague kills everybody. But then the mask, there's a man wearing a red mask, and he comes to the party, and then he takes off the mask, and it's the face of the Red Death, right? It's a metaphor for no matter the thing that kills the commoners will kill the rich eventually, right? And it's kind of a metaphor for that.
As much as folks like Elon want to act like they could flee to Mars and escape Earth's problems, that's not happening anytime soon.
No.
So,
and I think,
yeah, you're right. I mean, being optimistic, I'm probably more of a pragmatist than an optimist, but I still consider myself a hope and optimist when it comes right down to it. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take the people with the money and the power to realize that their own asses are on the line too, and then they'll start leveraging some of that money and power to change things. It might not be until it's like right down to the line, and there's probably going to be some pain, but that's probably what it's going to take, because again, at the risk of sounding cynical, and maybe being cynical at that, ordinary everyday people, recycling trash bags and composting, even if everybody does it, it doesn't necessarily make up for the fact that the industries and the organizations and the major whatever's that are run by these rich folks aren't playing ball. You look at the fact that the largest carbon producers in the world, places like China and the U.S. and other places like that, they don't really give a shit. They're just sort of still pumping out carbon because they know because they know if they give it up, then they'll have to give up their quality of life. The thing that has to change is the paradigm has to shift so that cutting the carbon production becomes what saves their quality of life. people have said that for years. My astronomy professor at IUPUI talked about that when we were in his class, about how when the paradigm shifts, it'll become more profitable for them to make clean energy than it is for them to make um, dirty energy, basically, not unrenewable energy sources. And that's when things will start to change.
I do think that I would disagree with you only that I think the individual does have a responsibility,
Oh, absolutely. I'm
regardless
not
of
saying they don't.
regardless of, because you have a responsibility to what you can control. You have a responsibility to what you do. And it's the idea of like, and this isn't what you're saying, but I've heard this before from people. They'll say, well, I mean, the big corporations are the biggest polluters, so why should I even bother? It's an excuse for nihilism,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's so I'm
I hate
always
nihilism.
yeah, same. I'm always I always guard myself against it, and I try to insulate myself from it. I try to find things that I can do to where, I'm not going to, move the needle with Exxon Mobil, but I can compost, and
Mm-hmm.
I can make sure that, even if a lot of recycling just gets burnt into the atmosphere, like 9% of it works out, and that's great. That's better than nothing. It's not super great, but it's better than nothing. Um, a lot of it's choices you can make. Real people can make a difference, and they can shift the culture. Because I can't control ExxonMobil, but I can control what happens in my house.
Yeah.
I can control the purchases I make. I can buy used goods, you know. I can make sure that um, I recycle as much as I can. I buy used clothes all the time. And in doing that, I can at least know that I don't personally, or I am mitigating my contribution to the problem as much as possible. And if that's all you can do, then that's all you do. And that's more than enough. If everyone did that, if they came at life from that perspective and they just mitigated their contribution, you know, even 10%, 20%, whatever, I think that would be tremendous. And I think a culture shift like that, because the people in charge, the people with the money, they'll follow where the dollars go.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
no,
that's a good
that's
point.
not going to be everything, but the solution isn't one big thing. I think the solution is 100,000 tiny things.
Yep.
And so that's why I compost.
Yep.
That's
Well,
why,
good point. You make a very good point because it's kind of like I was talking with some people on space Twitter the other day about how
yeah.
you see a lot of times in movies, especially like movies, TV shows, fiction, it seems like they're always picking just one type of spaceship to do everything. And that's not how it is in real life. You look at the number of different types of rockets that different countries use, You look
Mhm.
at and you look at the different types of spacecraft that are launched by those rockets. It's a smorgasbord. That's probably how it's going to be in the future. And if anything, it's going to continue to diversify as new forms of propulsion are tested out and put into practice and things like that. So I'll get to the point I'm making with this in a minute, but like the space flight infrastructure of 100 years from now will probably be 10 times as diverse as it is now, if not more so, especially because by then we might actually have people moving back and forth between the Earth and the Moon, maybe even Earth and Mars and the asteroid belt somewhat regularly. And the reason I bring this up is because to touch on your point, um, with things like composting, with things like recycling, if enough people do it, then the rich and powerful will realize, oh, this is popular. We can cater to this. Part of the problem is it's the same thing as the voting problem. This is another analogy we can rise. And you look at the fact that the largest voting demographic in the United States did not vote. If those people would just tune in and fucking participate, they might move the needle more than anybody else. But they don't think their vote matters, or they think their vote will be canceled out, or something like that, or whatever, and they don't participate. And.
Here's how you get Americans on board. You know the segment of the population of Americans that um are paranoid preppers.
Mm-hmm.
We'll call it 35%. Like paranoid, just like I'm gonna be self-sufficient. I'm gonna do what I want, and the government can't and make me, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are the people I'm trying to get to, right? And if you can make environmentalism, recycling, right? If you can somehow put that and feed it into that weird sense of independent paranoia, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to learn how to grow everything. I'm going to compost. I'm going to recycle, right? Because it's poisoning the air, it's poisoning the water. Because the industries, the people with power are poisoning the air and the water. And so this is how I make sure I don't do that, right?
Yep.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it's because it's like again, I draw on yet another tweet or some such that I saw a while back talking about how the people who are often like that, the people who are preppers who want to stockpile arms and ammunition and like survival gear and stuff like that, they don't realize that that's not what's going to help you survive the end of the world. Because if the end of the world comes, you're not going to have power. You're not going to
Yeah.
have like a way to produce more food. You're basically just going to have what you have stocked up, and then you're dead
You're
because you
gonna
have no way to survive. The thing that's going to protect us from the quote unquote end of the world, should it ever come, God forbid, is community. Um, what's the word? Community
gardens.
entanglement, community cooperation, basically. You know,
Yeah.
people interlocking their hands on different levels and different projects to make sure that everybody's taken care of and making sure that everybody's fed, making sure that there's like common farming and stuff like that. And everybody thinks, oh, that's like socialism and stuff. No, that shouldn't have to be. It shouldn't be seen that way. It should be seen as things that are going to. It's an insurance policy against the shit that you're worried about if you're a prepper, but nobody as a prepper wants to see it that way because of the myth of American individualism.
There are a lot of preppers that have mutual aid groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did throughout the pandemic, I digested a lot of a YouTube show called City Prepper.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of good that came out of that. I learned a lot of things. Don't venture too deep into the comment section unless you're way into QAnon. So just stay away from there because they have a whole like put on the horns and storm the Capitol vibe. But no, there's a lot of people that I actually was invited to join a mutual aid group with preppers one time from an old National Guard buddy I know. And I said, no, thank you, sir.
Mm.
Because I don't know if we're going to learn how to grow things preppers or a more, we'll call it intense flavor. I don't want to like insult people, but
See the old tongue in, I don't know if it's if you even want to call it tongue in cheek. It's not really tongue in cheek at all. It's right out there in the open. The sort of unspoken joke about preppers is that if you stockpile all this food and ammunition and other supplies to survive the end of the world, you kind of want to have to use it at some point. So you're basically like those friggin' evangelicals who are like praying for rapture so they can go to
yeah,
heaven. It's like you're praying for the end of the world. What the fuck is wrong with you?
they're scared, man. Like they are a group of people that could really use some anti-anxiety medication. you know, there's legitimate things, and 2020 was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people, myself included. And I thought, oh, I need to have a response to any problem that's 72 hours long that I can handle on my own.
Yep. It's that's one thing that always gets me about it is people talk about the end of the world. They don't realize that, well, what are you talking about when you say the end of the world?
Well, I think it doesn't seem to be very well thought out on their end, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it is, we talked about how conservatism comes from a sense of scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And if the world is scared, if the world is very much a zero-sum game and your whole world is based around scarcity, well, the end of the world means things are more scarce.
Yeah.
That's I would say they the more intense preppers would have a hard time verbalizing it that way, maybe, or maybe they wouldn't talk about it that way. I don't know. But I'm kind of extrapolating from my own experiences, my own upbringing and stuff,
Mhm.
where that you just less access to resources or no access to resources. And but I just to circle back to environmentalism, to
Yep.
protecting the environment and stuff. I think if you I think if you introduce environmentalism as a way to protect individuality,
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Actually, I'd actually forgotten about what the original topic was. So I'm glad you
and
brought us back to it because that's
yeah,
really the only way to do it. That's the best way. And obviously, your point is that's how we bring the batten down the hatches folks aboard. But it's really the best way to do everything. It's really the best way to solve all these problems because if you can turn a if you can find a solution to the problem and then turn that solution into an agenda, then
mhm,
then you're cooking with gas.
an
Because
agenda that everyone can get behind,
yes, an agenda that
and
people can actually pick up on and feel connected to and want to take part in because they feel like they can identify their role in it. Again, if you're one of these, even an intense prepper as you call them, making it so they understand that hiding in a hole isn't going to protect them from the world, but protecting nature and the world so that we don't have to hide in a hole. That's the best way to do it because like I said, to a certain extent, it's kind of circling back to what we said earlier about how it breeds nihilism. If you think the
yeah,
world is going to end in the end, again, whatever that means to you particularly, if you think the world's going to end within the next 10 years and you're just stockpiling canned food and bullets, you're not really doing anything to prevent the end of the world. Whereas if you're maybe stockpiling stuff, but also trying to make sure that there's uh, community aid and recycle, common universal recycling and whatever else whatever other policies you want to implement to try and prevent the end of the world, such as it is, then you probably won't need to hide in that hole. It becomes something you have in case like nuclear war breaks out, God forbid, or a
could
meteor
be a funny
hits.
thing you show your grandkids.
Exactly. Because, that's happening now. You look at our grandparents. You look at my parents. My dad was born in '54. He remembers the duck and cover drills.
Yeah,
Um, my mom probably does too. I think, and you know, we laugh at that now. Kids nowadays laugh at that, but we don't realize that for 40 years the world lived in fear of being blown up by nukes at the push of a button. And there were a couple times that really came damn close to happening.
yeah,
And nowadays we look back at that like, oh, that was never going to happen. And hindsight's 2020, and we always think that it's never going to happen. But first, we got to get there. You got to get to where you can look back on things with fondness and irony.
yeah. So I think we solved the climate crisis. Um, and here's if I can summarize it. Uh, it's first of all, it has to be more profitable to fix the problem than to keep
Mm-hmm.
perpetuating the problem. And also you have to that's on the big scale, right? Unless you just flat out like take, legislative action against those organizations that have bought Congress. Um, but to really fix the problem, especially in America, which is a very individualistic country, you have to sell it to them as a way to maintain your individualism because you will never be more dependent on an organization than if it supplies you with air. Like if it supplies you with breathable O2 because the outside is too polluted.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Just look at Total Recall for proof.
yeah, there's a show on Apple TV Plus called Extrapolations where the guy who did Contagion worked with climate scientists to extrapolate, hey, what's a possible future that what might happen over the next 80 years?
Mm-hmm.
To the point where people like San Francisco is so polluted, like you have to wear like a O2 mask to just go outside. and people are uploading themselves into the cloud and having their bodies incinerated and stuff, and it's shit is bleak, man. But and that is a show, as a piece of science fiction, it's good, not great, I think, but like as just a general like picture of what might happen is haunting.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that's the scary thing is that a lot of people look at bleak dystopias like that, like bleak future outlook, bleak, keep saying bleak, keep that at visions of the dark visions of the future. We've gotten so inured to them, or whatever. I don't know what a better word would be. So we've gotten so used to them that we look at them as just sort of a gee whiz thing now. We don't look at them as a cautionary tale anymore for the average person. You know, the average person, you show them Soylent Green, they're like, haha, they're eating people. That's funny. It's like, no, you don't realize in 1971 or whatever the original book was written, because I think it was a book first. And when this was originally written, people thought that the, you know, Malthusian nightmare of there being like 100 billion people on the earth by the end of the century was possible. And, or by the end of the 21st century was possible. And, you know, they're worried that there's not going to be enough to go around, like we said earlier. That's what people don't consider. You know, that's
yeah.
another thing that we need to teach people is literacy to understand what these different lessons are actually have to teach them. Because if you don't teach them literacy, they're just going to continue to, you know, munch their popcorn while the world ends, because they won't see the parallels between 1984 and the real world, or, you know, Soylent Green in the real world, or the show you just mentioned, extrapolations, and the real world, and realize that, hey, there's things going on here that we don't like, that we can take action to change in our own daily lives.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I do science communication. That's something we talked about a lot in my residency, because the whole theme of the residency was science futures, talking about how do we communicate cutting edge and advanced, you know, stuff into the stuff that's happening now that will continue to happen over the next 50 years or so. And a big recurring theme was that it's basically there's a lot of overlap between that and science fiction, because what a lot of science fiction is, especially near term science fiction set, as I like to say, 5 minutes into the future, is that it takes things that are happening now and says, well, what next? You know, some of the greatest science fiction ever has done other things. You know, Star Wars obviously is a glaring example, because it's not even set in this galaxy and it's supposedly set thousands of years in the past. But on the other hand, there are other great examples of sci-fi that have done the whole, you know, what if this happened for another 10 years? What would it be like? That's basically what this extrapolation show is doing.
Yeah.
It's saying, if the current climate crisis continues unabated for another 50 years, what's life going to look like? And, you know, the basic messages it has to say is we wouldn't like the way it looked.
And it would be people just kind of muddling through their day, kind of like we are now, except you can breathe outside usually.
Yeah.
Um,
It comes back to the frog in the boiling water analogy. You know, that's the scary thing, is that people will just accept the way the world gets shittier and meme about it instead of doing things to make things better, which is sad, because we become nihilistic. We become apathetic. I don't want to get. I'm not trying to get up on an apple box or anything, but, you know, apathy and nihilism are the death of humanity. Because if we become apathetic about the way the world is changing instead of getting at least passionate, if not downright angry, then we're not going to take action.
almost everything in our house we got used, you know.
Drive the zeitgeist.
The phone I talk on is a refurbished phone that I bought from Amazon. You know, it's, you know, we buy some new things, but I drive a really old car, you know. I probably won't get rid of it for a long, long time. Yeah, you know, and give yourself the grace to not be perfect, but celebrate when you're like, oh yeah, you know, we kind of, you know, we grow our own food, we compost, and you know, buy those hippie trash bags that like are made from like potato fibers and stuff, and not like, you know, petrochemicals. and so when they biodegrade within like 9 months,
Mhm.
and they're compostable too. And so they totally, I think that's a symbol almost of how we fix the problem is the trash bag itself becomes biodegradable. And then one at a time, all the items in the bag itself become biodegradable. Right.
Yep.
But this sort of thing doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly. And eventually, if enough people move the needle, if enough people buy the thing, it becomes profitable for everything to become biodegradable.
Mhm.
You know, like this water bottle in front of me says 100% recycled water bottle or 100%
Yep.
recycled bottle. I'm assuming it's true. I have no reason to think Dasani is lying, but I'll
Those
be honest, that's the
bastards
reason.
at Dasani.
Yeah, I know, right? If you guys want to sponsor us, I'm open to suggestions.
At which case, at which point I will take back what I said.
We will cut this whole segment. But
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, it's exactly right because um, it's like I said before.
that's why I bought it.
When
It's the whole reason I bought the bottle was because it's. I mean, I was looking for a water bottle. I picked the one that said 100% recycled.
Yep.
Anyway, you're saying.
No, you're fine. It's when the solution to the problem becomes profitable for those who are helping perpetuate the problem,
Yep.
then the problem will start to be solved. It
Yep.
basically boils down to, when enough people want biodegradable products and recyclable products and non-toxic products, all these different things, then the Green New Deal won't be some radical, and I feel that's because it's a buzzword, it's a buzz phrase. But things like the Green New Deal won't be some radical thing that the Republicans point to as scary and bad. By then, they'll probably adopt it for themselves. It's just like what happened with give it another 20 years. When, like I said before, when the forest fires start burning down gated communities and the rising oceans start flooding like private, yacht clubs and stuff, then we will probably start to see the Green New Deal be adopted by the right, and they'll be starting to say things like, well, here's how we can implement this into our infrastructure program that President such and such has,
Zuckerberg, but yeah.
Who?
Zuckerberg, but yeah.
Oh, God, please don't wish that into existence.
It's not Mark Zuckerberg, it's his clone.
How do we know he's not a clone right now?
That's a fair point.
I don't know why this brought me there. Have you followed any of the debacle of the secret invasion
The
thing?
show.
Yeah, because apparently it has been getting dragged over the coals by reviewers.
Yes, it's very watchable. It's not terrible. I'm maybe 2 or 3 episodes in.
Apparently it does not have a good ending, so I will set that up for you.
I mean, sure.
But the reason I bring it up is because why did I bring it up? God damn it! Now I've lost my train of thought. Just a second. Let me find that again.
Zuckerberg.
Yes, there's because you understand the basic premise, right? That the scrolls have like infiltrated Earth and they've replaced certain people. Well, there's a joke in there that I don't know if you've gotten here yet, so I'm sorry if I've spoiled something. I'm going to go ahead and spoil anyway. Apparently, Rhodey is a scroll.
Oh yeah, I mean I'm on the internet.
Yeah, like Colonel James Rhodes or whatever is a scroll. And there's a joke that someone did on Reddit or Instagram or Twitter or whatever the hell, where it was a screenshot of the show where Martin Freeman's character, the like FBI agent, or whatever, is in like it's sort of like that thing in Stargate where the episode of Stargate SG-1 where the people are being replaced by doubles and they're all like they wake up and it's like hanging from the ceiling in Stargate Command when their double is killed. Martin Freeman's character wakes up and he's like in this like harness or something, and he looks over and says, "Colonel Rhodes, how long have you been here?" And you look over, and I can't remember the guy's name, but it's the actor who played him in the first Iron Man movie. He said since 2008.
You mean when they switched black guys?
It's like Terrence something or other.
Terrence Howard.
Terrence Howard, yeah.
They just switch black guys, and they're like, no one's gonna notice. Everyone noticed. Oh man, that would be really funny if that's how they reintroduced Terrence Howard into the MCU. Oh
Well, I
man.
mean, technically, um, Robert Downey Jr. is not a part of the MCU anymore, so they could totally get away with it because that's the reason Terrence Howard left, because he hated working with Robert Downey Jr., from what I understand.
All right, sir. I like this episode. It's gonna be about environmentalism. And
Yeah,
yeah,
saving the world.
it's not what I actually recorded an episode like this. I think last year is called "Seeking a Plan for the End of the World." It
Mm-hmm.
was a take on the movie "Seeking
Yep.
a Friend for the End of the World." I'm clever,
Mm-hmm.
where I kind of detailed my prepper journey throughout the pandemic. But yeah, this was good. Do you have any other thoughts about environmentalism and all that?
Well, I
Wrap
mean,
up.
we've covered pretty much all the bases. I mean, that's
Like,
basically what I'll just sort of sum it up by reiterating what we said already. The only way to solve the problem is to get multiple levels of people integrated. Like, it's, it takes people on the low, it takes people. I don't mean lower level to say like, oh, not as important. It,
micro and macro.
Micro and macro, exactly. It takes people at all levels of society to be invested in the plan to save the world.
Yeah.
As you would put it, for the plan to work. Because not only it takes people who are just recycling and composting, but it also takes the companies that are putting out the products that are ending up being recycled and composted and so on. They all have to be working together. And if anything else, one thing that we haven't really touched on, we've sort of danced around it, but we haven't really touched on, is that one of the things that's going to solve that is just getting through our freaking, getting over our thick egos, getting
Yeah.
over this whole, like, this rugged individualist ego. Because as much as it is like part of the American identity, it's also hurting us. Because when people think, well, I'm the only person I need to take care of, or maybe my like small family is the only thing I need to take care of, that hurts the country as a whole. That hurts the world as a whole. Because
Yeah.
when everyone thinks that way, you've got 300 million people, or however many, family masters, maybe like maybe 50 million people who are actually running a family, or whatever you want to call, whatever the number actually is in the United States. You've got 50 million people who are thinking that they all need to look out for themselves and a few people in their immediate sphere of influence. And when everyone's thinking that way, nothing gets done. And I know it's not literally that many, because again, there's
Yeah.
probably not that many people, and there's probably a lot of them who are thinking, forward, who are forward thinking, but we need to get more people involved in that. And part of the way to do it is like what you said, is get them involved in it in a way that makes it real to them, that the way they can help actually does something to push the needle.
Because if they don't find themselves invested in the solution, they won't even acknowledge the problem.
Yep, exactly.
And on that note, we'll end there, and we'll talk a little bit afterward. For the Blanket Fortress of Solitude, I am Derwin.
And I am Nick.
And we will see you next Monday morning at 0700.
Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
Read? What's happening? Am I dead?
I bet you like zombie books.
I like food. Do you have food?
You don't need food at dividedbyzerobooks.com. It's full of nutrient-rich science fiction.
Ugh, I'm stuck in an ad, aren't I?
Once I stop talking, reality will collapse until someone plays this ad again. This isn't the first time we've had this discussion, and it won't be the last. Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
What did you think of that, sir?
So a lot different than what I thought we were going to talk about.
I was going to talk about chapter 8, but I guess we'll do that next time.
Yeah. So you are planning on rewriting chapter 8, though? We will. I guess that's one thing we can talk about here.
I mean, yeah.
Because I've noticed as I've been looking at the document that your most recent notes for Erebus are in, the prologue is still at the front. And I'm not worried about that, because I figured at some point you would either pull that out and drop it back in chapter 8, or you would just erase the prologue and replace and slot something else into chapter 8 based on what you said you were going to do, which is reworking an old version of Chapter 8 or some such.
I'm gonna take an old version of Chapter 8 you did and kind of incorporate some of the stuff I did in the prologue, and kind of, well, fuck it, we'll talk about it here in the tag.
Sure, it's kind of a kit bash, basically.
Yeah,
What it is. You're taking an older version of Chapter 8 and
yeah,
you're mixing in some of the stuff you did in the prologue and then making
Yeah.
it's kind of like dialectics, actually. That's because that is something that I learned in film class. You take one thing, you take another thing, you combine them and see what they inference from the two of them.
And here's kind of what I had in mind for this was expanding the scope of Chapter 8,
Mhm.
right? To where Chapter 8 might encompass 48 hours,
Yeah.
because it becomes a short story almost all by itself,
Yeah.
where
Good idea.
it's 2 days, and the first day sets up Janet's life on the fob. It sets up Pepper, sets up everything, right? Because the way Chapter 8, the first draft, lots of telling.
Mhm.
The way I did lots of telling. Or the prologue didn't quite work. But if we expand a lot of it into some show, then, I remember life on a fob, on a port operating base. And I'll have to think about what it must have been like for a woman on a base, because it was a lot different than my experience.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to have to use some empathy there, right? I won't get, deep in the weeds with it or anything, but I know there was 20 men for every woman sometimes.
Yep.
That is a very, very imbalanced ratio. And so they had, their lives were different or whatever, right? I probably won't go too deep into it, but I'll probably talk about that a little bit. And a lot of it will be just kind of her life on the fob, waking up, doing PT, whatever. And I'll definitely need you for a rewrite on that.
Yeah.
To make it work with where they're at, because otherwise it's going to be, oh, look, they're in the desert and it's sand, and but it's Titan, and it.
Yeah, the sand's made of ice.
I don't know the science. I can bring the experience though.
Yeah.
And
you bring the military experience. I can either bring the science or I can find people who have the science.
There you go. And so that's kind of my plan. And the Chapter 8 rewrite will probably be the last fucking thing we do on this. And I love this book, and I'm also kind of excited to work on the next thing.
I was about to say, I hope you love working on the next one just as much, because we probably have about I won't say 100, because half in jest, that even sounds daunting. But there's probably a lot more where this came from. Let's just say.
Yeah. A lot of rewrites. Yeah.
Well, and I don't mean just rewrites. I don't mean just in terms of rewrites, but I mean like future projects. Like even if we count the other 2 books in the Shadowplay trilogy, and maybe the 3 books of the Darius trilogy, and the possibly 7, 8, 9, however many books of the Frontier Wars trilogy, that's a lot of books.
Well, right now,
all the other little offshoot books that I want to do, and short stories, and God knows what else.
Well, right now, here's as far as I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We're signed to do 2 books.
Yeah.
That's as far with books. That's as far as I'm thinking. Short stories are a lot easier to figure out.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts of? Well, no.
I get what you're coming. I get where you're coming from, and that's honestly the smart way to do it, because I don't want. It's not good to count your chickens before they hatch. I just know that this is obviously what I've wanted to do for a very long time.
Same.
Publish these books.
Oh my God, same. I love publishing. I love bringing a book to market. I love writing the book. I love all the aspects of it.
And it's like, you've sort of touched on how like you're so excited to meet some of my other characters that I haven't even introduced you to yet, and I really am excited for you to get to meet them and for you to find out what they're about and find out what they're up to, because there's characters. Again, the ones that I'm referring to mostly are the three main characters that I've been playing with probably since like 5th grade.
Well, here's what I would say to that. Realistically, Erebus comes out next year.
Mm-hmm.
Realistically, if everything goes really smooth, maybe Europa comes out 2025. Maybe. That's if everything works and my schedule doesn't become crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I would. This main story you're talking about with these main characters, what do you have done on this?
I've gotten probably about 5 chapters, maybe 6 or 7 chapters written.
All right, I would finish it.
Yeah.
When
I
we
just need to
finish,
get around to it.
I would. I mean, as your publisher, as your best friend, I would say, realistically, we've got a book in us every 2 years. It'll take us 2 years to bring a book to market, and that's if we're cooking. I would say, yeah, because we've been working on Europa for fucking ever. And again, I love this book. It's just more like, oh my God, we're almost done. Like I'm so ready to move on to the next segment of it.
You mean Erebus?
Erebus, yeah. See, I'm getting tired.
You're fine.
But
I am too.
I think, I mean, we'll just do the shorts and stuff. Talk to me about the 5 chapters. What are the 5 chapters?
I can actually pull that up. Just a sec.
Yeah, tell me what that is.
We go to Frontier Wars, Titan Gambit. I think this is it. I can find out how many. Oh, apparently I have part of 10 chapters written.
So you have 10 chapters.
I've got 9 chapters completed, and then like 5 chapters of a 10th.
Why do you fizzle out at 9 chapters?
Because I just get bored.
Okay.
It usually takes me about a couple of weeks to write that many chapters, and then at that point, I've just moved on to the next idea.
But if you have
I have about a 2-week attention span.
But if you have a writing partner to keep you going, okay. Yeah. Well, here's what we're gonna do. I also haven't signed a contract to get it back to you yet. I need to do that. I haven't done it. I'm sorry.
Wagging my finger at you. The listeners can't see this, but I am doing it.
Yeah. What is this book called?
This one is tentatively called the Titan Gambit.
And where does it take place in relation to the first 2?
This one takes place. It starts in 2389, which is about 35 years after Erebus.
Okay.
And again, it's the way I would describe it. It's set in the same universe, and it will eventually have some character overlap, but it basically is its own story. Because this is like when I say the main story, the reason I say that is this is the story that I have the most traction, that I have the most history with. Because before Spacers Saga had all these other offshoot stories, like things like the Erebus Effect and the Europa Goodbye and Alphas, as you've heard about, and we think we've talked about here, all these other things. It was just this story. It was just a story of these 3 main characters and their associated friends, and then they're like the rogues gallery, so to speak, fighting over who's going to run the solar system. Or again, back in the day, it was multiple solar systems. It was an interstellar thing, but that's basically the gist of it.
So that's our book after Europa.
Yes,
that's what we do, because I'd like to. Unless we become wildly successful and make $1 bajillion doing this, I would love to get to that. That seems like that's the most important book to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, hell, would you want to do that instead of Europa next?
I'll have to see which one I feel more. I don't know.
We can just rewrite the contract.
we could see off to see because that might not be a bad idea because again, this is the story that lets like I don't want to say that Erebus isn't going to sell the Spacers Saga, but Erebus is like it's like a again I don't want to downplay Erebus because of all the love and TLC we've put into it, but the Frontier Wars story, which is what this series would be called, this like sub series, it's the bread and potatoes of the Spacers Saga universe. Because like it has a follow-up series that's set like 60 years later. It's got the series whatever. It basically what everything centers on. Because the Frontier Wars is one that I've been playing with the longest, one that I have the most lore built for, the most characters built for. I could send you the Bible for the series that had like the series Bible that I wrote. No. If you want to look at what the series like would be like in its long term.
No, but that's just because I'm not interested in a series.
Yeah.
I'm interested in a book.
Gotcha.
If this is if this is your like Wrath of Khan, dude, like.
Well, again, I don't want to. I want to caution you. Oh, hello.
Yeah.
I want to caution you that, and again, I don't say this to like try and be difficult by any means, but I want to caution you that this isn't like something that I threw out there as a one-off, because the Titan Gambit being the first book in the Frontier Wars series, that's kind of what it is. Because it's not like Wrath of Khan is an amazing movie. I watched someone watch it for the first time the other day on YouTube.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Still holds up, and it holds up as a great sci-fi movie and a great movie in addition to being a great Star Trek movie. But it also fits into the Star Wars continuum, or not Star Trek. It also fits into the Star Trek continuum. Let's just cut that out. That's a flub. It fits into the Star Trek continuum because after Star Trek 2 comes Star Trek 3. And then as much as people may like to diss on Star Trek 3, it has its place in the continuum. And then so does Star Trek 4 and 5 and 6 and so on.
But what I'm saying is I think we should do that book next. Is there any reason we shouldn't?
Nah. Because me, I will probably continue to dabble away at Europa Goodbye when if we're like an editorial pause, like if you're working on your edits, for example, of Titan Gambit, I could probably work on the Europa Goodbye. If I have a spare afternoon where I like have a really good idea for the Europa Goodbye, I could write a chapter. That's the beauty of having creative control, is you can basically work on the project when the inspiration strikes, and still have the main goal, which is again the book that would be in the contract, which is be what we're working on.
Because I have the intention and the desire to continue working with you in perpetuity.
Yeah, me too.
I cannot guarantee that.
Yeah.
And so while I'm in a part in my life where I can do these things, it feels like the Frontier Wars story, this thing you have 10 chapters of already, that feels like the absolute most important use of our time.
Yeah.
And if this is the meat and potatoes, we can always do this and then do Europa and then do another thing you have 9 chapters of, and then just kind of like bounce around and finish all these unfinished things together.
Yeah.
But, or let's posit a world where we only do 2 books. Not because we have some fight or falling out, but because you get hired on at NASA full time. I become a dad.
Yeah.
And then we only have time for the podcast or something. Whatever. I don't want to do 12 books and then the main stuff.
Yeah. I get what you mean. And I really gel with that, because that makes sense to me too. And then the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. It's kind of because that's at the risk of, I won't say at the risk of, that's another thing that I kind of have always found funny about our relationship is one thing that we have in common is that, we both have the same reaction to an idea. First, we reject it, then we play with it, then we think about it, then we entertain it and think it was a good idea from the start.
It was my idea the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't.
So when you say let's do this book, the one that I'm currently looking at the Google Doc for right now, and let's do this book next, I first was like, because I had it set in my mind that we're going to do Europa Goodbye next. But now the more I think about it, the more I think, oh, this is a damn good idea. Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying we're going to do all of the Frontier Wars things, because as your publisher, I'm saying, hey, what's the closest to being done?
Yeah.
We're going to do the things that are the closest to being done.
Yeah.
And then and if any of those, it's kind of like we're throwing different, and if any of those gel with like people, pick up steam, traction, whatever, it's probably the direction we'll move in.
Yep. Because obviously, and again, this is sort of counting our chickens before they hatch. This is counting our eggs before they're even laid, really. But if any of the stuff ever really takes off, then it might preclude the need for us to have day jobs. We could do this stuff for full time. You could have your books. We could have your bookstore, and I could go to Hollywood or something, or whatever. Again, that's all pipe dreams right now, but the sky is really the limit.
Sky's the limit. And and I'll cut this part out. If I do win the $1 billion, well, guess who's going to self-finance some projects?
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll just like hire you on as like the full-time, you just write full-time.
Yeah. That'd be the dream.
That'd be the dream.
I would live in your basement and like wear like a friggin' like house elf loincloth or something and just write full time.
I would buy the house next door.
Good idea.
Like, fuck, like $500 million. That's infinite money. Like I could disassemble every piece of this house and reassemble it identically with brand new pieces and still have infinite money. It would be such a waste of resources. But anyway, sir, God, that's almost enough for a whole second episode just on that, just the tag. So that's probably what that'll be.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we'll do the Frontier Wars next. You said you've got about 10 chapters.
Yeah, I've got 9 and change, and if nothing else, I also, like I said, I have a plan laid out because in the course of doing a series Bible, because this is one of those things that I originally perceived this as being a series of books. I would then hope to turn into a TV series someday, sort of like Babylon 5 or something with a planned runtime, a planned number of seasons.
Yeah.
But in the course of doing a series Bible, I inadvertently also very handily made a outline for the first book, basically, and could probably write the first book based on the outline for the first season of the TV show.
Okay.
So yeah, I basically have a vision, a plan and vision for what I could do for the next however many chapters it is. Because I am going to say this one might be a little bit longer than Erebus. It might be a little bit longer than 18 chapters.
Okay.
But it's just this because I know that we've talked about how long my writing is. This might be a little bit longer even than usual for me because it might have some more ground to cover.
Do you feel like you'll be more protective of this than you were with Erebus?
Probably not. And the reason I say that is because now, if anything, it really helped working with you on Erebus first. Because I'm not as naturally protective about Erebus because it's not characters that I'm so inculcated with, or whatever friggin' better word there would be to put there. Feel free to edit in a good word there. A good verb, nice action verb. But I think having had that experience of working with you on Erebus, I realized, oh, Derwin's not going to like do anything cheap. He's not going to cheat me on my characters. He's not going to just like, take cheap shots at them. He's my buddy.
Yeah.
And beyond being my friend, he's a good publisher and editor. He wants to make this work the best it can be. So don't worry about killing some darlings. Don't worry about doing this and that. Because if anything, the place I'll be protective is when I have to like refer back to the Bible and say, well, here's what's going to happen down the road that you may not know about. So that, like, if you say, well, why don't we just kill this character? Why don't we combine these two characters? I might have to refer to the text and say, well, here's why, Derwin, because this character comes into play like in volume 6 or something, and I'm setting up for that.
I would.
And again, part of the beauty of that is we may come to a place where we realize that if we do the thing that you're saying or some version of the thing that you're saying, it sets up something better in volume 6. That's the beauty of working together. It's not being a stick in the mud. It's realizing that there's compromises we can make.
Yeah. And I'm, I mean, for me, volume 6 is so entirely hypothetical. It's about as realistic as me winning the lottery, at this point in time. So yeah, I mean, for me, I've always been, I mean, the fact that we even published Spacers book 1, I think is kind of a fucking miracle, especially since it was mid-pandemic and we were all stressed out, insane, crazy people. And, and none of us handled anything well. And the fact that it even all came together, right, is a fucking miracle. As she navigates a pandemic, late-stage capitalism, while pretending everything is totally fine, Sloane lives alone with her dog, Moose. Struggling with this juggling act, Sloane breaks down one night and wishes magic were real. The next thing she knows, she's having a conversation with her dog and levitating a spoon in her kitchen. Subscribe now to Versatile Ambitions on Substack and read the first chapter of Once a Millennium today.